Chapter 17. The First Handbook. Natalia Voronova found her work in the laboratory very interesting. Working with so remarkable a scholar as Dr Buteyko more than compensated for any difficulties, although difficulties were in no short supply. Even setting aside the by no means insignificant matter of the pitiful salary, 98 roubles, there were slings and arrows of fortune aplenty. Natalia quickly realized that Buteyko's discovery of the diseases of deep breathing had made him the target of relentless persecution. Professor Pomyekin had ceased to have authority over the doctor on a formal level only. No break-up of the institute was going to make him abandon his malicious maneuverings. Natalia's colleagues, who, like herself, felt the considerable weight of Pomyekin's hand on their shoulder, told her in strictest confidence that Dr Buteyko had several times been invited at Pomyekin's instigation to attend the psychiatric hospital, ostensibly for some kind of consultation. Moreover, there were rumours that they had him on their books and were actively trying to get him diagnosed as schizophrenic. Once they've decided to use psychiatry against him, there'll be no let-up, Natalia's closest colleague had commented. They'll do whatever it takes to grind him down. He managed to treat one of the top brass with his method in the nick of time, just as well, because otherwise they'd have shown him no mercy, the colleague concluded. The stress of the situation made itself felt everywhere. Admittedly, the laboratory was affiliated to a different institute now, but that didn't mean they'd stopped treating people. Their treatments were 100 times more successful than Pomyekin's, and the self-appointed cabal who controlled the medical establishment couldn't forgive them that. If they couldn't actually manage to get this troublemaker Buteyko consigned to a secure ward, they could at least weave an invisible but effective tissue of lies round him. OK, they would say, he hadn't yet been kicked into touch like he should be, but that day would come. And all this was a psychological hurdle which had to be overcome not only by Buteyko himself, but also by the people engaged alongside him in their uphill struggle. Producing the methodology handbook had been a particularly demanding task. It was, of course, not the first attempt at this kind of overview and systematization of the materials gathered. They'd been doing their best to circulate handbooks unofficially for a long time, but this was the first to be published officially. It appeared in print in 1964, just before the May Day festivities. It was a greenish colour and smelt of printer's ink. At the top of the dust cover was written in small print, KP Buteyko, Ph.D., Medical Sciences. The doctor, pleased as punch, had given everyone several copies each. He'd handed a whole 5 copies to Natalia, who was as pleased as he. She kept reading what was printed on the cover. Handbook for the treatment of bronchial asthma, angina pectoris, hypertension, and obliterating endarteritis using the method of volitional elimination of deep breathing. This was followed in parentheses by, for doctors who have undergone specialist training in the laboratory of functional diagnostics. They'd had to include this rubric, but actually the establishment had so far been in no hurry to allow any doctors to come to them. For the most part, the handbook would actually be used by patients themselves. We'll only give it to people who've completed our training course, Buteyko declared, just as a kind of checklist, because in any case no one can really grasp anything without the help of a trainer. There was a buzz of approval from his comrades at arms. Natalia continued perusing the text they'd been so carefully working on just a short while ago. After many years of using the combine complexator, a unit combining various instruments producing physiological data to study the conditions indicated. The phrase brought Natalia up short. The conditions indicated. Yes, if they'd allowed Buteyko to list all the illnesses the method could relieve, just think how many more patients they could have reached. But as it was, there had been immense difficulty in getting the go-ahead for even the limited list of conditions in the text. Why? Well, think about it. If this one sainted method had been painted as a cure for numerous complaints, it would have smacked of a panacea. So it had been a case of steady on, folks, don't over-egg the pudding. Natalia brought the handbook up to reading distance again. No matter, they'd included what they could. Even as it stood, it was a real triumph. She continued reading the familiar text. With the cooperation of other institutes of the Soviet Academy of Sciences, Siberian branch, the Laboratory of Functional Diagnostics, Dr KP Buteyko, Ph.D., Medical Sciences, of the Institute of Cytology and Genetics, has discovered one of the primary direct causes leading to the emergence and development of the conditions indicated. The cause in question is a breathing dysfunction which takes the form of chronic hyperventilation of the lungs, an abnormal deepening and increase of the rate of breathing whether the subject is at rest or exercising. She was pleased to note that the word hyperventilation stood out in bold type. A reduction of carbon dioxide levels in the body, constriction of blood vessels, and tighter binding of oxygen to the blood reduce the flow of oxygen to the cells of the heart, brain, and other organs, damage the bronchial tubes and blood vessels, stimulate the nervous system, adversely affect sleep, and give rise to shortness of breath, headaches, tinnitus, angina attacks, metabolic disorders, weight gain, high blood cholesterol, a rise or fall in blood pressure, biliary dyskinesia, constipation, and other dysfunctions. Collier, the lab technician, had begun reading the text aloud, but was now told by the others to pipe down. Normalization of breathing immediately begins to eliminate the symptoms indicated, read Natalia, the sentence jumping out at her. At the foot of the second page, the handbook stated that normalization of breathing almost completely prevents heart attack, stroke, the progression of atherosclerosis, and emphysema. And a little further on, there appeared the first of 3 diagrams included in the handbook. It was headed Normal Breathing, and was the lab staff's attempt at illustrating a healthy person's pattern of breathing. The ideal to strive for. An undulating line with horizontal sections between the peaks showed that in a really healthy person, an inhalation lasts 2 to 3 seconds. The exhalation lasts a second longer. The automatic pause between the next inhalation generally corresponds to the length of the exhalation. Laying the handbook aside for a moment, Natalia recalled the heated debates which had developed when the diagram was being worked on. Most of the staff thought it was vital to include a diagram of this sort. If we're asking people to breathe normally, then we need to give them a benchmark, an agitated Dr Buteyko had insisted. In the end, Buteyko had gone along with them, but he still voiced one doubt. He was completely behind the idea of including a benchmark for health, but was seriously concerned that patients might misinterpret it. "Of course, they should know about it," he said cautiously, "but I'm worried they may be so eager to count the seconds that they lose sight of the main object, reducing depth of breathing by means of relaxation." Subsequent history proved him right. On numerous occasions they had to discourage people from putting too much emphasis on counting seconds for inhalation and exhalation. But you won't get very far in any science, least of all medicine, without trial and error. It was a stage they had to go through. At first, the lines, "the patient must have a sound knowledge of what normal breathing should be like and be able to measure their breathing rate and determine the length of time the breath is held," had seemed entirely uncontroversial. There followed a detailed explanation that each breath consists of an inhalation, an exhalation, and a pause, as illustrated in Figure 1. Breathing exclusively through the nose was advocated, whether the subject was at rest or undertaking gentle physical activity. A detailed breakdown was given. First, a slow inhalation lasting 2 to 3 seconds and as shallow as possible, 0.3 to 0.5 litres, almost imperceptible to an observer. This to be followed by a calm, passive, complete exhalation lasting 3 to 4 seconds. Then a pause of 3 to 4 seconds, a further inhalation, and so on. It was brought to the attention of the uninitiated reader that a healthy person's rate of breathing is 6 to 8 times per minute. Under these conditions, ventilation of the lungs does not exceed the required norm of 2 to 4 litres a minute, thus providing the level of 6.5% CO2 within the pulmonary alveoli, which is so vital for the body. It seemed as if everything in this portion of the text had been tweaked to perfection, but subsequent experience showed that while a patient must of course know how to count his own breaths per minute, On no account should he frequently resort to such counting, far less at every moment of his practice. Experiments revealed that if a patient concentrated his attention on actually keeping count of his breaths, the result was even greater overbreathing, and that results not in a reduction in the respiration rate per minute, but in an increase. But of course, all these methodological amendments came later, with the benefit of experience. For the moment, in the run-up to the May holiday, the laboratory was proudly celebrating a great achievement, its first officially published handbook. The staff were still animatedly swapping reactions to particular passages, and in the corridor patients were already discussing how they could get their hands on one of the precious copies. Natalia read through the section entitled How to Correct or Normalize Breathing Twice. After all, it was no time at all since Konstantin Buteyko's assistants had helped him polish the final version so painstakingly. For no less than 3 hours per day, either at rest or when exercising, walking or doing sport for example, patients should make a conscious effort to reduce the rate and depth of their inhalation and also to develop a pause after a calm exhalation, thus endeavouring to bring their breathing closer to normal, Figure 1. This crucial section of the handbook continued. Further, no less than 3 times a day, in the morning, before lunch, and before going to sleep, patients should perform 3 to 5 maximum breath holds after exhaling, developing the breath holding time to 60 seconds or more. After each protracted holding of the breath, the patient should rest for 1 to 2 minutes, taking shallow breaths. In this section too, not everything would remain unchanged, but the phrase patients should make a conscious effort to reduce the rate and depth of their inhalation outlasted a great many later innovations. Care had been taken to include contraindications in the handbook as well. These included the acute phase of myocardial infarction or stroke, terminal conditions, psychiatric disorders, and chronic tonsillitis. However, it was noted in brackets that even these restrictions were not absolute. Figures 2 and 3, placed one above the other, clearly illustrated the fact that a healthy person can hold their breath for at least 60 seconds after exhaling without any special effort, Figure 2, and that a sick person's breathing, even at rest, can be shown on a graph as a steep 1-second rising curve during inhalation, followed by an equally steep 1-second falling curve during exhalation, immediately followed by another rise, Figure 3, with no horizontal plateau. In a healthy person, however, Figure 1, a smoothly rising curve during inhalation gives place to an even smoother descent during exhalation, then becomes a horizontal plateau, which corresponds roughly to a 3 to 4 second automatic pause. The handbook concluded with a reminder of the need for medical supervision and a list of the most common mistakes patients made when mastering the method. Glancing out into the corridor for a moment, Natalia was immediately relieved of 2 of the copies Dr Buteyko had given her. The patients were in such an anxious frenzy to get their hands on them that they literally snatched them from her. "Just you wait, they'll be fighting over them next," said Buteyko, grinning at the shock on her face. "Anyway, cheer up," he added quickly. "We published the handbook so people could read it, and people will help themselves. No surprises there. What's important is that they don't go making the mistakes we've pointed out," he said, opening the handbook at the penultimate page. "We'll gather at my place for the May Day festivities," the doctor announced, this time for everyone to hear. "The boat's ready. We just need to find another one and we can get the whole team over to the island. It's time to celebrate our victory," he went on, raising the small green book above his head. "Meet at my porch in an hour's time after the May Day parade. Come suitably dressed."